Another CEO Wisdom podcast with Alan Du Preez. Today, he is CEO, interim CEO, and matter of fact, of Human Improvement Sciences. Last time I spoke with Alan of the pod, we discussed about a whole array of interesting topics from AGI, Einstein, human superintelligence, EQ, and everything in between. Alan, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about you.
Yes, certainly. I was born in South Africa, came to Australia in 2006, and perhaps the usual immigrant journey. You arrive here with a blank slate, and what appeared on my blank slate was transformation. And so I would, I went on a transformation journey myself personally. So I have a deep lived experience of transformation. And I began to learn about other people in history that have gone on a similar journey where it wasn't easy. Their insights were hard won. And it typically takes people a lot of time to process and to translate this into language. So these experiences, they occur beyond the reach of language, and then we try to translate them into everyday English, which in itself is a journey. So that's been my journey. That's how I became interested in consciousness. And it's been a rather long journey to try and explain this in plain English. But that's everybody's challenge. And now, part of what drives me is I have gotten to learn that we have enormous dormant potential. And this potential, our consciousness, is awoken in different ways. So I'm now wanting to help people awaken their consciousness, perhaps in a less chaotic way than mine was awoken, and to help them realize their full potential in a shorter space of time.
Right. So, how can you use EQ and consciousness to solve IQ problems?
Very good question. IQ is perhaps could be explained as a soldier. Now, this soldier is really good at detail. He's really good at telling things apart. But he actually needs the direction of a general who can see the big picture, the battle plan, the strategy. The two need to work together. They're not in competition. The foot soldier is really good with the details, but he's hopeless with the big picture. When they're a team and they're working properly, they can do amazing things. In fact, if we're talking left brain, right brain, which is what we're talking here metaphorically, from what I'm learning, when the two partner up together correctly, once, of course, we've permitted our right brain to turn on, when they partner up correctly, we're able to solve problems that are completely out of the reach of AI, AGI, ASI, because we are now talking about human superintelligence. The surprising thing here is that, Einstein actually spoke about this repeatedly in plain English. And I'm trying to remember the word he used. I think it might have been grotesque. When people put him on a pedestal and said, man, you are this genius, and it's impossible that we will ever see another person like you, he, I believe, used the word grotesque. He said, this is grotesque. So he was quite adamant that he was normal. The only thing that he did different to any of us is he turned on his right brain. He switch to a higher level of consciousness. And when we switch to a higher level of consciousness, then our intelligence and our capability expands exponentially. So Einstein's way of thinking is replicable. Almost anybody can choose to turn on their consciousness and then have the same result as Einstein had. Perhaps not in the same areas as him, because for whatever reason, we are gifted with different areas of interest and specialization. So whatever my area of interest or specialization or calling is, I can really maximize my capability in that area if I choose to turn on my consciousness, or to turn on my right brain, or to switch to a higher level of consciousness.
How do you do that? How do you turn your consciousness on?
Well, it's a very good question. First of all, just by having this very conversation, we become aware of things we may not have been aware of. It's a bit confronting to become aware of the fact that I have a right brain and it is far more powerful than my left brain or my intellect. And it's also confronting to realize that it's been dormant, and for want of me plugging the damn thing in, switching it on, and booting it up, that's a bit embarrassing. I have this supercomputer that I didn't know I had, and I was foolish enough not to plug the thing in, switch it on, and boot it up. So we're all carrying a near limitless supercomputer on our shoulders. We can call this a neck-top computer, if you like. So in that language, if I must explain what I do, is I say I help people upgrade their neck-top computer.
Through conversations, because an organization must be even more complicated to do that. So what's your hacks to activate that button on? I go on retreats, I do meditation, listen to guided meditations, use breath work, use microdosing, psilocybin, psychoactive substances, and sometimes heroic doses to completely disconnect and see that new world with new eyes. How do you activate that other than conversations?
So you were talking about entheogens as a pathway. There's a very interesting story there. Stanislav Grof, he's one of the founding fathers of transpersonal psychology, and he's done a lot of mapping in the transpersonal domain. What he actually did is he was approached by a laboratory. He was at university, and the laboratory said to him, "We have this substance, please can you test it?" It turns out the substance was LSD. So I'm imagining what was done was a very controlled lab experiment with a very controlled dosage. Nonetheless, he describes it this way. He says his assistant had a strobe light, and he was laying down, and the assistant increased the frequency of the strobe light. And then his consciousness left his body, and then his consciousness left the lab, and then his consciousness left Prague, and then his consciousness left the planet. And I guess the protocol was that she will then start reducing the frequency of the strobe light. And then the reverse process happened, and he reintegrated. So this is how he became aware of another domain, a non-temporal domain. And I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, Sam Harris, who is described as one of the four horsemen of new atheism, he had the similar experience. the result was he wrote a book, Spirituality Without Religion. So he became aware of a non-temporal domain, and he felt compelled to write a book to describe this domain. So there's this one pathway which we've spoken about, entheogens. You mentioned meditation. That's another pathway. Trauma and adversity. If we have intense trauma and adversity and we dig really deep into the inner person, that can also trigger an awakening of our consciousness. And there are people who have had that experience. So my approach is coaching. And I have seen it work. The important thing here is to realize that we all have this inner voice, this inner person that is very quiet, that is overpowered by ego and intellect. So instead of me telling people a whole bunch of stuff, you know, what is really powerful in coaching is questions, guided discovery. Last week when we spoke, we did a thought experiment. So that is a growth area for me. Even although I believe very much in right brain, I find that I communicate very left brain. So I need to learn to communicate in pictures. So last week when we spoke, that was an exercise for me to sharpen my skills at communicating in pictures, especially big picture. And perhaps we could do another little mini thought experiment right now. What do you think?
Sure. I'm always down with it.
Okay, rightio. So maybe I can make a statement, set the scene a little bit, and then ask a question. So we have this 70-year-old CEO of a forestry company. That's the scene. The question is, why does he want his two managers to get in a helicopter for 5 minutes?
Because his two executives, if they get to this other place quicker, they can save more trees and make more money that they can reinvest in offset carbon than if he doesn't.
Okay. So he does want to benefit the business. He's got these two managers. It seems to me that because he's 70 years old, he wants to retire. And he wants to figure out which of these two managers has the mindset to be able to replace him. So he's going to put them in this helicopter, and he's asked his assistant who will be in the helicopter to observe these two people, to observe their response. Now, of course, he knows they've been managers with his company for many years. He knows these two managers know trees very well. But there have been some indications, and he's had some struggles with these two managers, and he's become aware of the fact that, using Einstein's words, these two managers have seen thousands of trees, but they have never seen a forest. So he's putting them in this helicopter, and the helicopter is going to take off, and they will see the forest. His knowledge of these two managers tells him that the one will not like this, and the other one will love it. And it turns out he was correct. So perhaps in our thought experiment, I could ask you, what do you imagine coming out of the mouth of these two managers as the helicopter goes higher and higher and higher?
Well, one can simply shut up and not say anything. The other can nerd out on the fact that he envisions this forest as money and talk about it and have ideas. And I don't know, maybe have a conscience in nature and what they're doing, and probably having the importance of replanting this tree and keeping this beauty alive. Maybe he might have the conscience that what they're doing, and they might like chop down this whole forest and leave it bare, and that's quite ugly and disturbing. And maybe he's hoping for that, the 70-year-old guy.
Absolutely. So, as you described, the thought process of the guy who's beginning to see the big picture and engaging with it, what came to his mind was one of the things you mentioned was sustainability. If you manage this forest sustainably, then you will have a sustainable business. And that makes a lot of sense. That's common sense. We could frame it another way. Who gets into an airplane that he knows is going to crash? So at some level, we all appreciate sustainability. We want a sustained flight. So we don't want our companies to crash. We don't want our banks to crash. We don't want our cities to crash. We don't want our states to crash. We don't want our countries to crash. We don't want our economies to crash. We want sustainability, even if some of us argue against it. We have some problems. Perhaps our problems are valid because we're saying, aspiration is not matching reality when it comes to ESG. Yes, let's take that on board. But back to our two people in this helicopter. I was imagining, in simple English, plain language, the one person is screaming, my God, the trees, I can't see the trees anymore. My God, take me back down. And this guy wants to jump out of the helicopter. He's really not happy. He can't see the trees anymore, the details. He loves the details. And now that the details are getting out of focus, he's most uncomfortable. And the assistant takes note of this. And so guess what? This guy's not going to be the new CEO at all, but he's a very good worker. So he will be used with the details. We will not use him to manage ESG. No way. Won't work. He doesn't get it. He doesn't want to get it. He's quite happy with the details. He's really good with the details. I was imagining the other guy saying, my God, the forest. Look at the forest. Oh, wow, I've never seen this. This is amazing. Take me higher. I want to see more. Let's zoom out. Let's zoom out more. I love this big picture. Oh, my goodness. And then, as you said, ESG, sustainability, he begins to see all these things, and the assistant takes note. And so guess what? This person is going to be gradually transitioned into the new CEO.
Could be. Yeah, sure. An interesting thought experiment.
So what these two guys obviously represent is us, my left brain and my right brain. We're going to be a team, but we have different strengths, and right brain is really good with working with people, big picture, metaphor, synthesis. Oh, synthesis. Now, that is a very rare skill or rare thing. In today's world, we love analysis. Left brain, that's all we seem to know. We don't seem to do much synthesis. And Einstein was massively big on synthesis. And that's where all his breakthroughs really came from. He could see the big picture, and he could allow himself to get into that helicopter and get really excited.
And is that IQ or is that EQ?
Look, person by the name of Howard Gardner, who has worked in multiple intelligence theory for a very long time in academia, and the public at large. So if we try to list the intelligences that have been identified, there's a long list. EQ is certainly one of them. No, we are not talking about IQ, perhaps a little bit of EQ, but more importantly, we are now specifically talking about intuitive intelligence, or I don't know, intuitive intelligence quotient. And Einstein was not backwards in coming forwards about intuition. It's just amazing that if you stand in front of a room full of people, and ask them to explain Einstein in one word, I suspect you will hear the word genius, which is what Einstein was. You will hear the word, perhaps, people who are more into science will use the word relativity, which is why they say he was a genius. But almost nobody in that room will say intuition, which is how Einstein became a genius. So intuition is one type of intelligence, and in my work, I classify intuition as an existential intelligence. So for me, existential intelligence is a category or a class. There are several intelligences that behave this way. Intuition is one of them. So they engage with the big picture. They're good at working with people.
Intuition, is that the accumulation of knowledge without, and when someone asks you a question or when you think about something, you don't, it's like rapid fire shooting from the hip, knowing something, retrieving information that's already been synthesized and that has matured from data your brain has accumulated before? Or is it more complex than that?
Look, these are emerging fields and there are competing opinions. So there's two groups of people who want to argue about where this knowledge comes from. And there's an academic here in Australia, in Brisbane, Dr. Marta Sinclair. She's now written 3 academic handbooks on intuition. And there were, tens or scores of contributors for these books. And she obviously wanted to unify them somehow. And she used a unified definition. And she says, let's agree on this thing at least, And so the definition was direct knowing. Our left brain wants to argue the details. That's perhaps not all that important. What is important is that this intuition is freakishly powerful. Einstein demonstrated it. People who spend all their time analyzing this thing and arguing about the details might never get to use the damn thing. And perhaps that's where we are at. We want to write more books about intuition. We want to run away from the definition, the synthesis, which says that intuition is direct knowing. And of course, we want to run away from Einstein. We find Einstein very confronting, the notion that he was normal and that the only difference between him and us is that we have yet to turn on our right brain or our consciousness. That's a bit confronting for the left brain, because left brain has become king and ego and all that, doesn't want to be dethroned, doesn't want to yield to a higher power, even if that higher power is in my own brain.
Interesting. Yeah. And so Einstein, arguably the most intelligent human being, or one of the human being that impacted the world the most with his minds and his thought experiments. He did a lot of these. He thought in images, and why we're constantly referring to him, I guess, his mind has not been equaled since then. I think his breakthroughs were quite groundbreaking the scientific community. How do we bring that back to business? Is Elon Musk the Einstein of business?
Very good question. For me, Elon Musk is an enigma, and I'm still trying to understand and explain him. So far, this is what I have. He has maximized IQ. He's come up with some amazing ways of being able to see things other people cannot see, using methods other people haven't thought about using, and maximizing IQ. I suspect, and in these ways of thinking, he himself has become aware of the importance of consciousness, but I don't think he has made the switch, because when you make the switch, you move into a soft power space. You move away from hard power, you move into soft power, and you become much better with people. Now, we all know what's happened at Twitter. We know that he has relented in appointing Yacarino, and so she's more conscious and she's good with people. He is really good with technology. He's a genius at the technology level. I don't think it's fair to describe him as a genius with people. So no, even although he's aware that consciousness is really important, he has not found the switch. But he's intelligent enough to be able to work out that something's missing, and perhaps something will happen that will trigger him to look into this space, and perhaps he will consider people like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was likewise a flawed enigma, but he did have strong intuition, and he did believe in intuition. He was lacking in the people space. Yeah, absolutely. Any case, so I think we were talking about application to business. So perhaps as a continuation of the thought experiment, I can make some application.
Let's do this.
Okay, so and perhaps I want to make two statements, and perhaps we could ask if you can try and hear or try and imagine the left brain response, the guy in the helicopter. Try and imagine these two guys, what their response is to these two statements. The first statement: in business, there are only two levers: people and technology.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Perhaps yes, and then I'll make the second statement. Thank you.
False. There are so many other things than humans and technology. I mean, where to start, right? Mindsets. If you run a physical business, you have a table and a chair, material, yeah, and all kinds of different sciences. I mean, tech is a science, psychology is a science, humans are a science, organization is a science, finance is science, marketing, there's so many things.
Okay, that sounded like a left brain response. That's saying, hang on, what about all the trees? Here's all the details. So perhaps we could ask you for a right brain response.
Well, there's only one thing in business. There's not two. There's value.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I like that, because now we're talking big picture. I suppose that in this context, value is an output from how we manipulate these two levers. So we're synthesizing now. We're doing abstraction. We're doing metaphor. This is all right brain stuff. We've left behind a hell of a lot of details to come to the point where we are summarizing a million different levers in two levers, saying, hello, there's two levers. It's people and technology. This gives us the opportunity to start realizing that we have optimized the technology lever and ignored the people lever. Now, to drive this point home a bit further, we make the next statement. And if we could again ask you for your left and right brain response to the next statement. So now we're going to talk about the people lever, and we're going to say the people lever has only two positions: heartlessness and consciousness.
Very much agree, yeah.
Okay. So that sounds like a right brain response.
Yeah, it's like from the hip.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, people will say, oh, define consciousness for me. And they might start heading off to all the details. And, you know, we're getting back into the herding cat space when we do too much analysis. So we say, hang on a bit, let's come back to the helicopter. Let's calm down, and let's enjoy this big picture thing. You know, let's not get caught up in the fact that we have here an unsolved problem in science, which, by the way, we believe we have solved. We have an unsolved problem in science where people can't agree what consciousness is. So now we're going to start arguing about all these definitions of consciousness. Let's keep it simple. All of us know what a person or leader with heart looks like. We know how that person makes us feel. We know how good they make us feel. We know that they lift our spirit, they lift our productivity, they lift our contribution like no other. We would crawl on glass for them. So we know what consciousness is. We know what a conscious person is. It's a person with heart. We know it intuitively, instinctively. We know, and you know, going one step backwards, all of us find it really hard to forget the people who made us feel really, really good or really, really bad. And this is what we're talking about: heartlessness versus consciousness. Heartless people and environments make us feel really, really, really bad. They crush our spirit. They crush our productivity. They crush our contribution. They are bad news. So now there's some questions that come to mind, you know. Why do we not create less heartless people and more conscious people? I think perhaps last week we discussed the impact. You know, again, using abstraction and big picture and extrapolation. Heartlessness leeches between 20 and 40% off our bottom line. And that bottom line includes GDP. So we waste 20 to 40% of our GDP because the people lever has been left in the default heartlessness position. We haven't pulled that lever to the consciousness position. Now, that inaction means we also lose something else. We lose the advantages of having pulled the lever into the consciousness position. And those advantages means about 10x. I'm just going to look at my notes. Give me a sec. Where's my notes? If we pull the consciousness lever or the people lever into the consciousness position, that has the power to 10x our bottom line.
What organizations do that?
Good question. What is tempted to say none, but we do have some precedents. They gave us small glimpses. Last week we spoke about Apple, and you rightly pointed out that they have their failings, they have their flaws. There are things that they could do better for sure. However, they gave us a tiny glimpse. They experimented with a small dose of intuition, but quite explicitly. Steve Jobs explicitly experimented with intuition and humanizing the product. He even spoke about embedding a human spirit in the product. Now, the consumers loved this. Staff maybe were not so happy. The people apparently who worked with Steve Jobs, they saw a nasty side to him. Nonetheless, he gave us a small glimpse of what can happen to your bottom line. You know, he returned to Apple when Apple was almost bankrupt. And in 14 years, it became the world's most valuable company. And yes, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned value. So our measures of value, those themselves can improve. They're far from perfect, but nonetheless, bottom line, he more than 10x'd the bottom line. And within 13 or 14 years, Apple became the world's most valuable company. And that was from almost bankruptcy to the world's most valuable company. And when he handed over to Tim Cook, is equally aware of the importance of intuition and equally deliberate and intentional about intuition. He's, I guess he's an introvert. He's more in the background, but he has been, he's been at the helm, and Apple became the world's first $1 trillion company, the world's first $2 trillion company, the world's first $3 trillion company. And so, when you take the people lever to the consciousness position, we are now talking about 100x value. Again, we know that our measures of value are not perfect and have bad outcomes and that sort of thing. But for better or for worse, we measure market cap, and Apple 1,500x market cap. So there is something there, and there is precedent there. We can be more intentional about this whole thing, and we can, I hesitate to say, I've been told that people don't like to hear this. We can outperform Apple. So I've had to change my website domain name from Outperform Apple to Grow Like Apple to make it more, believable. And the same with the website that is targeted to government. I've had to change the domain from outperform China to grow like China. So stepping stones. But we really are talking about near limitless power that resides in all of us.
Interesting points. Well, Alan, thank you so much. So people can find out more about you on LinkedIn, I guess, Alan Du Preez, and your website, Grow Like Apple, Grow Like China. Is that it?
That's correct. Grow Like China is reasonably up to date, and I'm busy changing over Grow Like Apple. That's not ready yet. But thank you, Charles. It's really a pleasure to have a conversation with a thinker and somebody who has made the switch or is continuing to make the switch to a higher level of consciousness. I really appreciate people that have, in Nelson Mandela's words, he said that a good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination.